Hi and welcome to this DCP Web HTML5 and CSS beginners tutorial. In today's tutorial we're going to look at CSS borders. So let's open up our web browser and we'll open up Notepad++. Let's open our project and we'll drag the HTML here and here, and the CSS we'll drag it into here as well. So let's just set that to the left and we'll set this over here. Okay, so we want to look at CSS borders. In the previous tutorial we created this, what did we do? We did margins, right? We did margins and we also looked at padding. So let's look at this particular div tag. So if we look at this one here, where this content is, if we reference it, it's called intro text. So we'll go to our CSS, it's called intro text here, and let's add some CSS borders to this content. So the first thing we want to add is the border style. We want to tell it what style of border we want. So we're going to do border dash style and we're going to just say solid. And if we refresh, we see this solid border around the edge, right? Now if we did border, and a lot of this is quite intuitive, right? Border dash width, we can set that to 10 pixels and then we have a thicker border. Then we could do border dash color is let's do it red for now, and we refresh, we should see red. We don't see red, so there's something wrong here, and I'm using UK rather than American spelling, so there's no U in color. Now we see it's red here. Then we could do, you know, this border dash style. There's different versions of the style. So there's border dash style solid, there's dotted, I believe, then we get dots, then there's dash, then what is it, dashed with an ed, yeah, dash with an ed, dashed. Then we get these little like lines, dashed lines around it, and it looks more like a sort of a voucher thing you'll see sometimes, right? See these dashes on these vouchers. So we can also, let's set this back to solid for now and we'll refresh. So there's lots of different border styles. There's the width, the color. We'll look at some more styles in a moment, but let's set the border radius and we'll set that to, let's set it to something like, let's set it to 25 pixels and we'll set the color to black and we'll refresh. Now we've got this rounded edge, can you see? Now many years ago when I first started web development, if we wanted a rounded edge border like this, it was a real pain in the ass. It was it wasn't difficult to do, but it was long-winded, yeah? Took a long time, a lot of energy to get rounded borders and stuff like this, and even just borders in general. This wasn't really, you know, in the early days of HTML, a lot of this stuff was much more tricky to do. You had to create a table and then cut the corner out and then put it inside the table, and you have to do all sorts of craziness just to get something like this. But with CSS, a couple of lines of code, you're good to go. And the nice thing is that border will stay and it will respond to the size of the resolution here, right? If we stretch it all the way out, so the border is just being maintained all the way through. This is really good for like responsive design later. So when we want something to respond to the size of the screen, this border will be maintained. This is a bit too thick, right? So let's set it to 5 pixels. It looks a bit more clean now. So if we go to W3C and type in CSS, we don't need validator here. So we go to W3C CSS, we can go to this website. We looked at it before in other tutorials. And we look at CSS, we'll click on this drop down menu and we look at borders. It's a little bit hard to remember all of these, right? So there's dotted, there's dashed, we've looked at, there's solid. Let's have a look at double. So we'll go to, instead of solid here, we'll do double. And we'll refresh. It's a bit hard to see, so we'll set it to, let's set it to something a lot larger. We can see what's going on. Now it's got a double border, yeah? It's got one on the outside and one on the inside. So it's got this double border style, that's double. Then there is also groove. Let's have a look at groove. Refresh. And that's a bit hard to see, so let's set it to something like red maybe. Now you can see groove, yeah? It's like two shades. It looks a bit 3D sort of thing. It looks very 1990 to be honest. But it looks okay, right? So you can see grooved. There's ridged. What's ridged about? So it's pretty much the opposite of the groove. It looks like it's just switched around the style, so it looks like it almost looks like it's pointing upwards, right? These edges, they look like they're pointy, and then groove looks like it's let's just undo it. And then groove look like it will be indented. Yeah, kind of. It looks like it's sloping downwards here, right? This looks like it's going in, and then control Y, ridged. It looks like it's pointing upwards now. That's kind of the style, the effect. Inset. There's quite a few of these, right? I don't always use them all, so it's hard to remember what they all do. I guess that's just going to be the opposite of inset will be outset. And sometimes we use these borders to create buttons on pages. Rather than going into Photoshop and creating, you can use Photoshop to create your buttons and stuff, but now we tend to use CSS a lot to create buttons because we have a lot more control over those buttons, so we can manipulate the button size depending on the size of the screen and stuff like this. We're using CSS. We can detect the width of the screen, and when it gets to a certain width, we can change the style based on the width of the screen. So we can change the button color, we can change its position, we can change the style, the formatting. We can change lots of different things. So on a mobile, the button might have a red background, but on a desktop, it's much easier to see, and it might have a green background or whatever it might be. We can manipulate the content based on the size. Then you've got none, so there's no border, and then hidden defines a hidden border, defines no border. So hidden border and no border are actually different, right? None means there's actually no border at all. So if we do none, in theory this gap should close down a bit. And here it is, you can see the gap's closed down. There is no border, but it still has, and it still maintains the where is it? The radius here, right? And then hidden will actually have the border, but okay, it seems to be doing the same as none. These seem to be doing the same function. I thought hidden would still be there, but I mean, I hardly ever use that, to be honest. I thought hidden would still be there, but it would just maintain. Anyway, doesn't matter. So those are all the different styles. We'll just stick with solid for now, and we'll make this a bit smaller. It's way too thick, so let's set it to something like 15. That'll be fine, and we'll set it back to black, something like this. Okay, so that's just a basic example of borders, right? And the idea of borders is that instead of using graphic design software to do rounded edges and borders and stuff like this, we can just go ahead and use CSS to surround a div tag with a border, or to add a border to a div tag using these simple CSS elements here. So what else can we do? Let's try and set a little challenge, right? Let me give myself a challenge today. In theory, we should be able to create a perfect circle, so a circle like this, using just CSS, nothing but CSS. So no graphic design software, nothing else apart from CSS. So that would be interesting to try and do. So let's try and do that, because I'm not sure how we'll do this. Let's have a play. So below this H1 tag here, we're going to set a div tag, and we'll give it a class, right? because we're going to use CSS to manage this particular div tag, and we'll call it something like, let's just call it div circle. Now let's call it my circle, right? My circle. And as we open a div tag, we must close one. So let's just close our div tag here. So if we refresh, nothing's going to happen because we haven't created a class for it yet. So here, let's create a class. We'll call it, what was it called? My circle. And so at the moment, it's not a circle, it's just a div tag. It has a class called my circle. So like with all other div tags, we need to declare a width, right? We need to say that this div tag is going to be, let's say 150 pixels wide, and it's going to be, the height will be 150 pixels. We want it to be a circle, so it needs to have the same width and height. And then we need to give it a background color so we can actually see it, because right now we won't be able to see it, be kind of invisible. So let's set it to green, for example, green. So we've got the width, the height, and the background color. So in theory, we now see a green square. It's not a circle, it's a square. So we're going to make it a circle. Let's try and do that. So let's do something like, okay, here's another little challenge. What if we wanted that square to be right in the middle here, centered on the page, right? We looked at something called margins. Remember, we could put a width, a margin here, and a margin here. Let's do one other thing. This is really a useful feature. This is something I use quite often, right? So if we do margin, margin dash left. So we want to do a left margin, and we're going to set it to auto, and we're going to do margin dash right, and also set that to auto. And let's see what happens. We'll refresh, and we've got a typo in here. margin, margin. Now refresh. So margin left auto and margin right auto, what they're saying is take this div tag and put the width on the left and the width on the right identical. So make the margins identical on the left and right. So it doesn't matter now when we resize the screen, that box will always sit bang in the center of the browser there, right? So that's really useful. That's how we can get div tags to sit or div objects to sit bang in the center of the screen like this. And we use that quite often, you know. That's different to the text, right? The text up here is using a where is it? Text align center. Because it's a text element, we can use the align center here. Because we're aligning a div tag, we can use left and right auto to get the spacing on each side of the margin the same. So that's a little tip. That's kind of a bit off topic, but it's interesting to see that. So on this div tag, let's give it a border, right? May as well do that anyway, seeing as we're doing borders today. Border dash style equals what's it going to be? Let's do a solid, right? Yes, solid, and the border dash width will be 5 pixels, and the border dash color, spell it without the U, will be, let's just make it black. So let's see what happens. We should get a border around here, and it should be black, and it will be 5 pixels. Now, to turn it into a circle, we need to set the radius. This radius, so we can do border dash radius. And we set it to not a pixel value, but a percentage value. 50%. There's our circle. So just using CSS, we managed to draw a circle, perfect circle, green color, 5 pixel border, black, right? Nice and easy, really. Think about it. We could set the border style. What do we do wrong here? Save this. That's the color. Let's set this to dotted. Refresh. Now it's got a dotted one, right? We could do dashed. Then we'll have a dashed example. And we can also set the style very specifically, right? So we can do border. We can get rid of this dash top dash. I think it's like this. I'm pretty sure that'll be right. Now just the top of the border is solid because we declared it as top. So we could do top, and then we could just copy this one, paste it down, and change top to bottom. And now we just got the bottom and the top borders. So we can manipulate the borders specifically, right? And we can even change the style of the top, sorry, the width. So we could do border width equals 5 pixels. So we could do border dash top width equals 5. Let's set that to 50. So now the top has 50, and then the bottom one can have, let's just set it to a different number, 25. Now they have different values, right? It's interesting that we can actually manipulate the border and the circle. We can create these new shapes out of it, right? But it looks a bit messy, doesn't it? So let's just go back to our circle, and to do that we will simply get rid of this, and we just do border width, and we'll set that to 5 pixels, and we want border top style and border bottom style. So we just want border dash style to let's just set it to, what should we set it to? What did we do last time? We did solid, right? Solid here. Now we've got our normal circle back again. So why would we draw a circle like this? There's quite a few different reasons. You know, if you're going to create a computer game, for example, you want your circles falling down from the screen, and you want to do that in pure CSS and use JavaScript, then you could have all these circles dropping down. You could write different CSS for different colored circles, and then you could even do things like when the mouse moves over this circle, you click on it, it could just break or explode or disappear, and it could be a little game you could create, right? Maybe we'll look at that in maybe future tutorials, how we can create games using basic games using JavaScript and CSS, but that would be fairly complicated, so we're going to stick with some basic stuff, right? Now what you should really do is go to this Css Borders on this W3C school and just go and experiment. They've got loads of different examples. I don't want to make this tutorial too long, but you can go for all these different examples, and this is where you can learn a lot as well. You can see, look, all of the border elements, like the right color, the left. You can even change the color of the right hand side of the border or the left hand side. You can do loads of different things, and we can use CSS and we can use JavaScript. We can use different techniques, different tools, so that when we move our mouse over, the center circle could change color, for example. Then it could become almost like a button, right? Could be a circle button. Or if we change the width of this, so we changed it to something like 550 wide, then it will be like this sort of shape here. So we can manipulate, we could use JavaScript to change that shape. So we could have started like this, and then we could use JavaScript to change it and animate it from that shape to a circle shape. That's where we can start using JavaScript later. We'll look at that in a future tutorial where we can start manipulating the CSS using JavaScript. That's fairly complicated, but not beyond anyone's skill set, right? We all have to learn something at some point. So let's set both of these to 5 pixels. And that's about it for this tutorial. That's how I want to show you how we can manipulate borders, place borders around edges of objects or div tags like this, and create a perfect circle. We already know how to create a square. A square would just be the border radius set to 0, and then we have a square. So we could even change the square to a circle by manipulating the border radius. We can animate it from a square to a circle. We can do stuff like that as well. We'll leave it as a circle for now, and we'll close this, and we'll close this. So that's the end of this tutorial. That was about CSS borders, and I look forward to seeing you in the next DCP web tutorial.